TSA agent Karen Brenner quietly profiled travelers without consequence, certain her badge gave her immunity. One morning, she singled out Sloane Carter, a black woman traveling alone, appearing calm and unremarkable. Brenner assumed Sloane would accept humiliation quietly, powerless to challenge authority. But beneath Sloane's reserved exterior lay an unseen truth. She was the CEO of Jet Air Dominion, a leader who navigated corporate power effortlessly, with resources to expose injustice. Karen had believed she picked a victim who'd remain silent, compliant, invisible. She was wrong. This time, her flawed assumptions would shatter, not Sloane's dignity, but Karen's career. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The airport stirred slowly, like a giant waking in pieces. First the hum of escalators, then the roll of hard wheels on polished tile, and finally the low voices of travelers navigating early morning haze. Overhead, a digital board flickered with departure times and gate assignments, casting a pale blue glow across a steady tide of motion. The air was crisp, scrubbed sterile by machines and security protocols. Still, beneath it all, something human pulsed. Impatience, fatigue, anticipation, and the low-grade tension airports always seem to carry, as if the very act of transit demanded a kind of submission. Sloane Carter stepped through the automatic doors, coat fluttering lightly behind her. Her heels clicked with quiet precision on the floor, a measured cadence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. A slim carry-on suitcase glided beside her, its leather handle worn by years of consistent use. No entourage, no dramatic entrance, just one woman, composed and focused, merging effortlessly into the stream of passengers flowing toward the security checkpoint. Her outfit was simple but deliberate. Pressed slate gray slacks, a soft cream blouse, and a cashmere wrap draped loosely over her shoulders. Her hair, pulled into a clean twist at the nape of her neck, gave her profile the air of practiced discipline. She wore no visible jewelry beyond a watch and a pair of pearl studs. To the average eye, she might have been a consultant, maybe an attorney, someone successful, certainly, but not worth more than a second glance. That was exactly how she wanted it. Sloane preferred her visits unannounced. It gave her a clearer picture of how her airline staff performed under pressure, how they treated passengers when no one important was watching. Her routine inspection trips rotated through different terminals and different teams. Today's stop was Jet Air Dominion Flight 428 to Atlanta, a standard morning route with a full manifest. She would ride in economy like everyone else, take notes discreetly, and debrief with her operations lead later that afternoon. She adjusted her wristwatch as she joined the line at security. The TSA queue was long, snaking through metal stanchions with worn canvas straps. Parents corralled toddlers, solo travelers juggled laptops and headphones, and elderly couples double-checked pocket contents with visible anxiety. Sloane waited silently, eyes steady, observing everything. And then she felt it, a shift in air pressure, a ripple, not physical, but sensed. She looked up, just once. A TSA agent at the front of the checkpoint, a white woman in her late 30s with a tight ponytail and narrow features, was staring directly at her. The agent stood with arms folded across her chest, not scanning the line, not surveying the crowd, just watching Sloane. Not a casual glance, not the tired gaze of someone doing a monotonous job. This was something else, measured, suspicious, focused. Sloane returned her gaze to her boarding pass. Behind her, a woman muttered something under her breath. A man sneezed. Children squirmed. The line crawled forward. The feeling didn't leave. The closer she came to the front, the more aware she became of the eyes on her, like heat pressing in from the side. She watched the agent fake boredom each time another passenger approached, her face resetting into bland professionalism. But when Sloane was just a few people away, the agent adjusted her posture slightly, planted her feet. Ready. She kept her own posture steady. Her ID was valid. Her boarding pass was legitimate, her profile clean. Nothing was out of order. Still, she felt her pulse tick upward, not from fear, but from knowing. This wasn't about security, it was about her. As she stepped up to the conveyor, placing her carry-on on the belt with practiced efficiency, she prepared herself, not for confrontation, but for the performance, the slow unraveling of dignity that could happen when someone in uniform decided they didn't like the look of you. She had seen it play out 100 times before, not to her, but to others. "Boarding pass and ID," the agent said. Her voice was clipped, pleasant in tone but heavy with something less visible. Sloane handed both over without hesitation, her fingers smooth and steady. Her eyes met the agent's. She didn't blink. The woman studied the documents longer than necessary. Her eyes moved slowly from the ID to Sloane's face, then back again. "This yours?" she asked. "Yes," Sloane said calmly. "You flying alone?" "Yes." The agent stared again, then looked at the pass, then back to Sloane. A pause stretched between them, too long, too obvious. Her mouth shifted slightly, the corner lifting like something sour had settled in her expression. "Just a moment," the agent said. She turned away and spoke in hushed tones to another officer. A different TSA agent looked over at Sloane, squinting faintly before nodding. The woman came back. "Step aside, ma'am. We need to do a secondary screening." Sloane didn't flinch. She moved exactly as requested, stepping aside while the line resumed its flow behind her. A father maneuvered his stroller around her. A young woman slid her laptop into the gray plastic bin and avoided eye contact. Nothing loud had happened. No scene, no raised voices. And still, it was there. The tightening, the isolation. The agent snapped on blue gloves. Sloane stood motionless. She had done everything right. And still, this. The gloves snapped into place with casual authority. The TSA agent, her name tag reading K. Brenner, motioned for Sloane to step further aside toward a small inspection table just out of the main queue's flow. The metal legs of the table scraped faintly against the tile. The plastic bins beside it were empty, waiting. Sloane moved without protest, every step measured. Her heels tapped with deliberate restraint, and when she reached the table, she placed her carry-on gently down. Around her, the current of travelers kept moving, but eyes drifted. People glanced, then looked away quickly, like they'd seen something uncomfortable and didn't want to be caught staring. Karen Brenner pulled over a second TSA officer, a younger man with a clipboard who looked like he was still figuring out how to wear the authority of the uniform. He said nothing, just hovered near the edge, watching the senior agent with a mixture of deference and detachment. "Let's go ahead and open that bag," Brenner said. Sloane unzipped the carry-on herself. Neatly folded clothes, a tablet, a hardcover book, a slim folder containing evaluation forms and Jet Air Dominion documentation, none of which she reached for. Brenner began rummaging through it with the ease of someone used to going through strangers' belongings without asking questions. She pulled out the folder and raised a brow at the airline seal stamped on the cover. "You work for Jet Air?" she asked. "Yes," Sloane replied. "In what capacity?" "I'm in operations." "What exactly does that mean?" The question wasn't curious. It was coded in something else. Challenge? Suspicion. Sloane kept her tone level. "I'm conducting a routine review of service quality and compliance." Brenner flipped through the folder, eyes narrowing on the documents, though she clearly didn't understand their contents. She shoved the folder back into the bag carelessly and moved on, unrolling a blouse, then checking the pockets of the carry-on as if Sloane might have slipped something small and illegal into the seam. "Is this your only bag?" she asked. "Yes." "No checked luggage?" "No." "No electronics in your coat?" "No." Brenner held up Sloane's ID again and studied it for the third time. "This looks new." Sloane didn't respond immediately. She waited until the pause turned heavy. "It's a government-issued identification," she said. "It's within date. You don't look like someone who'd carry this kind of clearance." Brenner muttered, not quite under her breath. A flicker of something passed through Sloane's eyes, but she didn't move, not even her hands. The words lingered in the air between them, sharp and bare. The younger officer shifted uneasily and glanced at the ID, as if seeing it for the first time. "Everything checks out," he said softly. Brenner ignored him. From the next lane over, a voice whispered, "Are you seeing this?" Followed by the faint click of a phone camera being activated. Tia Ramsey, an influencer known mostly for her fashion content and lifestyle reels, had instinctively begun recording. Not the full scene, just a wide-angle shot from behind the line. She didn't recognize Sloane, didn't know the story, but she'd seen enough like it to sense what was happening. A black woman, well-dressed and patient, being searched like she was hiding something invisible. The silence around the inspection was loud. "What exactly are you looking for?" Sloane asked finally, her voice low but clear. Brenner blinked at her, then gave a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We're just doing our job. Can't be too careful these days, you know." "I travel through this airport regularly," Sloane said. "I've never had this kind of scrutiny before. Maybe you just got lucky." It wasn't even a smirk, just a flat, indifferent expression. The kind that said, "This could be your morning, or someone else's. Doesn't matter to me." She ran a small detection wand over Sloane's coat sleeves, her wrists, the inside of her palm. No alarm, no beep, no reason. "All right," she said after a few more seconds. "You're clear." She tossed the gloves into the nearby trash can and turned her back before Sloane had even zipped the bag closed. The younger officer muttered something like, "Have a good flight," but it was half-hearted and mostly swallowed by the buzz of the crowd. Sloane pulled her coat tighter as she returned to the belt to retrieve her shoes. No apology, no explanation. Not that she expected one. She slid her feet back into her pumps with silent precision and walked on without looking back. Behind her, Tia watched the woman's posture as she disappeared into the crowd. Shoulders straight, head high, stride unbroken. She didn't know her name, but something about that walk stayed with her. Quiet power, restrained fury, or maybe something else entirely. Tia looked down at the video on her screen. It wasn't dramatic, just a minute of footage showing one woman standing still while another rifled through her belongings like she didn't matter. She hit save. Sloane reached her gate 15 minutes later, settled into her seat on the Jet Air Dominion flight, and pulled the airline folder back out of her bag. She made a quick notation at the top of the checklist. Not about in-flight service, not about cabin crew conduct, just one word in capital letters: security. She closed the folder gently, looked out the window as the tarmac began to stir, and said nothing. For now. Jet Air Dominion Flight 428 lifted from the runway with a steady roar, its engines slicing clean through the morning fog like a blade through silk. Sloane Carter sat in seat 21B, middle row, economy class. No priority seating, no executive markers, just another woman in a modest blouse, her wrap folded neatly in her lap, eyes distant as the world tilted beneath her. The cabin buzzed with the usual murmur of flight, seatbelt clicks, overhead bin complaints, the occasional cough or clink of a soda can cracking open. She tuned it all out. Flight attendants moved down the aisle with professional efficiency, offering beverages and warmth in equal measure. Sloane watched every interaction, noting posture, tone, and timing. Smiles weren't enough. Authentic care, consistency, and discretion mattered more. She scribbled shorthand notes in the folder resting lightly against her thigh, but her mind drifted. Back to the checkpoint, back to the gloves snapping, back to the woman who looked at her and didn't see a professional, didn't see a traveler, didn't see a human being. She saw a threat. Sloane shifted in her seat. Her fingers curled around the pen again, but this time she didn't write. Instead, her memory slipped further, beyond the airport, beyond the present. Back to another room, another face, another moment when she was expected to lower her gaze. 15 years ago, she'd sat in a glass-walled interview suite at Dominion's New York headquarters. She wasn't Sloane Carter, CEO-in-waiting then. She was just Sloane, regional operations analyst, black heels planted firmly on commercial carpet, her resume polished, but not yet powerful. Across from her, an executive barely scanned her file before asking why someone with her background thought she could handle national logistics for a flagship carrier. She had smiled, then listed every airport she'd optimized, every vendor she'd negotiated under budget, every route she'd rerouted mid-crisis. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't blink. They hired her the next day. But from that moment on, Sloane learned to walk a tight line. Power didn't come with fanfare. It came with silence, control, composure. She could not afford outrage, no matter how deserved. Her ascent had been precise and quiet, built on results, not recognition. Even now, she walked terminals anonymously, by design. Better to watch without being watched. Still, this morning's encounter with Karen Brenner had sliced deeper than she'd expected. Not because it was new, but because it wasn't. Because after everything, degrees, boardrooms, budgets, shareholder wins, she could still be pulled aside like contraband. She looked out the window. Cloud banks layered the horizon in soft gray sheets. In the seat beside her, a teenage boy tapped away on a gaming console. Oblivious to her presence, she envied him for a moment. A chime overhead signaled descent into Atlanta. Sloane fastened her belt, tucked the folder away, and smoothed her blouse. She reviewed her checklist one more time, but her thoughts were no longer with the cabin crew or the aisle space or the catering service. They were back in that security line, back with that stare, back with the choice it left her holding. Do nothing. Let it pass. You've dealt with worse. Or, don't let it pass this time. The wheels touched down with a soft shudder. The cabin filled with movement, passengers retrieving bags and trading quick goodbyes. Sloane moved with them, blending in until she reached the jet bridge. A passing flight attendant offered a quick nod, not recognizing her as anything more than a passenger. Perfect. She exited through the main concourse, making her way toward the connecting terminal. Her day should have ended here. A few more notes, a quick check-in with ground staff. Then back to her car, her calendar, her next obligation. But her steps slowed, then stopped. And for the first time that morning, she pivoted, not out of necessity, but out of intent. Sloane turned around. She was going back to security. Across the country, Tia Ramsey leaned over her desk, phone propped up by a water bottle, the short video cued to post. She hadn't added filters or commentary, just a caption. It's 2025, and black women are still treated like suspects for existing. Look at this. She hit upload. Within minutes, the post began to climb. Hundreds of views, then thousands, retweets, comments, DMs, hashtags. A few verified accounts took notice. No one in the video knew who the woman was, not yet, but they knew what they saw. A composed black woman being searched for no reason, while white passengers passed through without pause. Tia refreshed her feed. Her phone buzzed. Another tag, another stitch. A local news anchor reposted it. Still, the woman in the video, Sloane Carter, had no idea. She was already retracing her steps, moving past the boarding gates, ignoring the confused glances from airline employees who recognized her but didn't dare question her pace. Her heels struck the floor with a different kind of rhythm now. She was done being invisible. This time, someone would see her. The crowd at security hadn't changed much. New faces, same choreography, belts being unbuckled, shoes shuffled into bins, agents giving practiced instructions in voices that sounded half-spoken, half-automated. But as Sloane Carter stepped back into the checkpoint area, something about the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was a subtle current, a momentary pause, the kind that moves through a room when someone important enters, even if no one yet knows why. She walked with purpose. No hesitation in her steps. No sign of nervousness or discomfort. The same heels that had tapped softly across the terminal earlier now echoed with quiet defiance across the polished floor. She wasn't here to blend in anymore, Karen Brenner stood near the ID verification booth, arms crossed over her Navy uniform, issuing clipped instructions to a teenager fumbling with his passport and backpack. Her face was the same as it had been hours earlier. Tight, guarded, suspicious. When she caught movement in her peripheral vision, her posture straightened instinctively. And for the first time that day, a flicker of something uncertain crossed her expression. Surprise. Sloane didn't slow her stride. She approached a nearby TSA officer stationed just beyond the stanchions and spoke in a tone that was calm, composed, and unmistakably direct. "Excuse me," she said, her voice neither raised nor rushed. "I need to speak with your supervisor." The officer glanced at her, confused for a moment by the firmness in her request, then quickly nodded. "Yes, of course. One moment." He moved briskly across the checkpoint floor, disappearing behind a side panel. Moments later, a man in a slightly wrinkled TSA blazer emerged. He was older, balding, with soft features and a sheen of nervous sweat already collecting along his collar. He attempted a welcoming smile, but it faltered as soon as he reached her. "I'm Supervisor Delgado," he said, extending a hand that hung awkwardly in the air before dropping back to his side. "Is there something I can help you with?" Sloane didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and withdrew a slim leather folder. From it, she removed a single black card with a silver embossed seal and held it up. Not as a flourish, but as a statement. "My name is Sloane Carter," she said, her tone clear and measured. "I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Jet Air Dominion. I was detained by one of your agents this morning under the pretense of a security risk. I'd like to clarify the facts, right here." Delgado's face drained of color in an instant. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He finally managed, the word barely escaping. "Yes," she said, not with pride, but with precision. "That was the point of my visit. I often conduct unannounced inspections of our airline service and partnerships, including security interactions. I prefer to see how passengers are treated when no one important is watching." Behind Delgado, Karen Brenner took a single step forward. Her face, once unreadable, now reflected something between confusion and discomfort. Sloane turned her eyes toward her. "This morning, you questioned my identification," she said. "You conducted a secondary search of my belongings. You implied that my credentials were not legitimate. Would you like to see them again, this time with full context?" She opened the folder and removed 3 documents: her corporate identification badge, her Department of Transportation clearance, and an FAA executive credential, each with her name, photograph, and appropriate classification. Karen didn't speak. She didn't reach for the documents either. She stood frozen in place, her body stiff, her lips pressed into a line. Delgado took a quick glance at the documents and looked as if he might collapse in on himself. "Ms. Carter, I want to offer our sincerest apologies," he began. "This isn't how we—" Sloane cut him off, her voice unwavering, never rising in volume, but gaining weight with each syllable. "What you want is for this to go away quietly," she said. "But it won't. Let me be very clear. This is not about an inconvenience. This is about the systems in place that allow someone like me, despite every credential, every clearance, every legitimate reason to be here, to be treated like a suspect, while others move through without a glance." By now, people were watching. Not 1 or 2, but many. The line at the checkpoint had slowed. Movement had softened. Travelers turned subtly, pretending not to listen while leaning just slightly closer. And near the back of the line, someone had lifted a phone. Tia Ramsey had returned to the terminal after looping back through the shops, drawn by something unspoken. When she saw the woman from earlier standing firm before 2 TSA officials, she didn't hesitate. She pulled her phone from her purse and began recording. This time, the camera captured the whole frame. Sloane standing tall. The supervisor visibly flustered. Karen Brenner standing stiff and silent. Sloane spoke again, her voice aimed not only at the officials, but also at the people around her, who were now listening, watching, waiting. I've spent years building an airline known for its integrity and efficiency. I've advocated for safety and reform at the national level. I've led conversations around dignity in air travel. And yet today, I was treated like I didn't belong. Not because of a policy, not because of a security alert, but because someone decided I didn't look the part. Karen opened her mouth slightly, but Sloane didn't give her the chance. You weren't following protocol, she said. You were following bias, a few people murmured. Someone exhaled sharply behind Tia's shoulder. Phones began to rise, slowly, silently. Tia didn't move, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the woman at the center of it all. Delgado tried again. Ms. Carter, please know that we will conduct a full review of this morning's procedures. I will personally file a report on— I'm sure you will, Sloane said, not unkindly, but with an edge of finality. Then she turned slightly, addressing the room, her gaze sweeping the checkpoint and the silent passengers who had paused mid-movement. This isn't about me, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. This is about everyone you treat like they don't belong here. Everyone who follows the rules and is still made to feel like a suspect. I won't be silent about that. She closed the folder gently, turned away, and walked through the crowd without looking back. No one blocked her path. No one stopped her. The power had shifted, and this time it was visible. By the next morning, the story had broken wide open. It started as a ripple, just a repost here, a reaction video there. But by sunrise, it had turned into a full wave. The two videos, the first showing Sloane Carter being pulled aside and searched in silence, and the second capturing her calm, cutting confrontation with TSA supervisors, were now playing on a loop across news channels, Twitter feeds, and morning talk shows. The first video had struck a nerve. A well-dressed black woman singled out, searched, and handled with visible disregard. Despite offering valid documents, it was quiet, but the power was in the stillness. The way she stood, dignified and alone, while her things were rifled through like contraband. The second video ignited everything. In that clip, Sloane's voice was firm, measured, unwavering as she revealed her identity to stunned security staff. Her credentials, her position, her declaration, "This isn't about me. This is about everyone you treat like they don't belong here." It was already being quoted across articles, think pieces, and captions. The line had become a rallying cry, layered over TikToks, reaction reels, and montage edits stitched together by creators moved by her composure. Networks aired both clips side by side, narrating the timeline of the incident while images of the Jet Air Dominion logo flashed across the screen. Analysts debated airport profiling statistics. Panels of experts weighed in on race, professionalism, and power dynamics. Former TSA agents offered commentary. Everyone had an opinion. And at the center of it all, without asking for the spotlight, was Sloane. Her name trended within hours. Not just in aviation circles, but across the country. Sloane Carter, invisible clearance, and dignity in transit all surged to the top of trending hashtags. She hadn't issued a statement. She hadn't contacted any press. She had barely even checked her phone. But the world had found her anyway. In her office atop Jet Air Dominion's sleek headquarters, a tower of glass and brushed metal that overlooked the city's sprawl, the air was tense. Inside the boardroom, conversations shifted in sharp whispers. Executives huddled with PR specialists, trying to gauge just how much this story could cost, or elevate the brand. The media team had already prepared a set of neutral drafts, none of which Sloane had approved. At the head of the table, she sat silently, one hand on the armrest of her chair, the other loosely curled near her tablet. She wasn't watching the clips. She'd lived them. "I just think we need to consider the broader implications," one of the board members said, adjusting his collar. "There's visibility, and then there's visibility. Our airline is all over the news. We should have been all over the news a long time ago," said another. "She's the CEO of one of the most respected carriers in the country, and half the public didn't even know what she looked like. She kept it that way, the first man muttered, not unkindly, but pointedly. She did her work quietly, efficiently. This is different. Sloane didn't respond to the commentary. She waited, letting the chatter run its course. It was Raina who broke the rhythm. Her niece had flown in from Chicago that morning, her spring break plans replaced with urgency. She walked into the room like it belonged to her, a thick binder tucked beneath one arm and her phone already buzzing with push notifications. She was 20, passionate, and unfiltered. The kind of fire Sloane had long ago learned to temper, but never extinguish. "You need to go public," Raina said, skipping the preamble. "Not just a statement. A real message. Interviews. Panels. Let them see who you are. Let them hear your voice." Sloane arched a brow. "They already have my face, my voice, and more hashtags than I know what to do with." "That's not the same," Raina said, placing the binder down with a soft thump. "You didn't ask to be a symbol, but that's what you are now. And if you don't lead the conversation, someone else will, someone who's louder, but knows less." There was silence. Then, from across the room, another voice chimed in, this one from the corner, near the windows. It was Tia Ramsey. Sloane had agreed to a quiet meeting with her earlier that morning, at Raina's urging. What began as a recorded video had turned into something larger, something heavier. Tia hadn't expected this level of response, but she wasn't hiding from it either. She stood with confidence now, despite the weight of the moment. "I didn't know who you were when I recorded the first video," Tia said. "I just knew what I saw, and it didn't sit right with me. I filmed it because people forget things unless there's proof. They say it didn't happen, or that it was taken out of context. But this, no one can say they didn't see it." Sloane looked at her, studying her face. Not searching for guilt, but weighing intent. "You didn't do anything wrong," Sloane said quietly. "You caught the moment. Now, the moment belongs to everyone." Tia nodded slowly. "I don't want to speak for you, but I will support whatever you choose to do. And if you choose to speak, I'll make sure it's heard." Outside the boardroom, the buzz hadn't quieted. Reporters waited. Journalists reached out for comment. TSA had released a brief, vague acknowledgement that an agent had been placed on administrative leave pending review. No names were given, but the internet had already confirmed everything. Karen Brenner's face was circulating. Her record, at least what the public could find, was being pulled apart by amateur sleuths and verified watchdogs alike. Inside the DHS, an inquiry had already been initiated. And inside Sloane, something had shifted. For years, she had led with discipline, with strategy, with results. She had been everything they told her would be enough. But now, in this moment, results were not what the world needed. It needed truth. It needed voice. She looked at Raina, then at Tia, then at the faces around the room. Some nervous, some inspired, all waiting. "I'll speak," Sloane said. "Not for the brand, not for appearances. I'll speak because silence has done enough." And just like that, the next phase began. Glenna Reyes didn't like stories that came wrapped in headlines. She liked the ones that unraveled slowly, one thread pulled at a time until the whole truth came loose in her hands. Her desk at the Civic Sentinel was already stacked with folders, tip sheets, and press kits from her past stories. Congressional ethics violations, pharmaceutical lobby leaks, corporate wage theft. But none of them hummed like this one. The footage of Sloane Carter had flooded every feed. But Glenna wasn't interested in reactions. She wanted the root. And something about the way the TSA handled that screening didn't feel like routine profiling. It felt targeted. She started where she always did, with the paper trail. Within hours, Glenna had acquired 3 years of public complaint records against Karen Brenner. Most were buried in administrative language. Phrases like failure to de-escalate, inconsistent application of screening procedures, and verbal conduct unbecoming. None of them resulted in suspension. None had ever gone beyond internal review. But the pattern was unmistakable. Brenner had disproportionately flagged black and brown passengers. Her incident reports included vague language, unusual behavior, uncooperative tone, evasive demeanor, all subjective, all convenient, all impossible to disprove after the fact. Glenna compiled the list and kept digging. Then she found something that didn't make sense. A copy of the security incident log from the day Sloan was stopped. The timestamp matched. The entry listed a routine secondary screening, but in the notes field, barely visible, was a short, chilling phrase. Anonymous tip. Passenger may be using falsified credentials. Investigate. That wasn't normal. Anonymous tips didn't trigger security screenings. At least, not without verification through proper DHS channels. And Sloan Carter, as CEO of a federally registered airline with DOT and FAA clearance, would have appeared green-lighted in every national security database the moment her ID was scanned. There was no protocol for overriding that without cause, unless someone had gone around the system. Glenna picked up her phone and called Sloan's office. By the time the two women met in a private conference room in Jet Air Dominion's central tower, the city had gone cold with spring rain. Sloan stood by the window, watching sheets of water streak down the glass, while Glenna laid out the file on the table behind her. "You weren't profiled by mistake," Glenna said without preamble. "Someone marked you intentionally." Sloan turned slowly. Her face remained composed, but her eyes didn't blink. "What do you mean?" "Marked?" Glenna slid the page forward. "This note was entered into the TSA screening log the morning you were stopped. It references an anonymous tip, flagging you as a possible impersonator. That would explain why your ID, even with clearance, didn't pass cleanly through Brenner's scanner. Someone wanted you pulled." For a long moment, Sloan said nothing. Her fingers moved to the edge of the paper, tracing the words with the soft pad of her thumb. "I assumed it was just another case of bias," she said, her voice even. "Another moment where my presence made someone uncomfortable. But this is intentional," Glenna finished. "And I don't believe it was random." Sloan nodded slowly, then walked to the far wall, where a whiteboard stood unused. She picked up a marker. She wrote the word motive. Then, beneath it, visibility, disruption, revenge. She turned to Glenna. "If someone wanted to humiliate me, they would need to know where I was flying, that I'd be traveling alone, that I was planning to pass through that checkpoint without alerting security. That kind of information would only be known to someone inside," Glenna said. "A DHS mole, or someone in your own ranks." Sloan clenched the marker, then began listing names under a new heading, access points. Only 5 people knew about her inspection itinerary that week. 2 were long-time aides. 1 was her assistant. 1 was the VP of Internal Operations. The last, her mind paused, was Vincent Rowe, former board member and now silent shareholder, who had been forced out 2 years ago after an internal audit uncovered ethical violations in the procurement department. He had fought the decision, publicly and bitterly, before stepping down under pressure. Sloan had never heard from him again, until now, perhaps. Glenna watched her scribble the name and circle it twice. "You think he'd go this far?" she asked. Sloan lowered the marker. "He wouldn't get his hands dirty, but he'd use someone who would." She sat back down, folding her arms across her lap. "I want to conduct a quiet internal investigation," she said. "If someone inside this company helped leak my travel information or collaborated with an external agency to flag me, I need to know. And if this reaches back to Vincent, I want it documented. Not just for my sake, but because this isn't just a scandal, it's a betrayal." Glenna nodded. "I'll work in parallel. I have sources in DHS and aviation security. I'll trace the flag back as far as I can." Before she left, Glenna paused in the doorway. "You know this gets worse before it gets better," she said. "I'm counting on it," Sloan replied. Once Glenna was gone, Sloan stood alone in the conference room. The whiteboard still glowed faintly under the overhead lights. She stared at her own name written beneath the word target, then picked up the marker again. She drew a straight line. This was no longer a public relations crisis. It was war. The conference room at Jet Air Dominion's headquarters was rarely tense. It was the kind of place designed to neutralize emotion. Frosted glass, whisper-quiet air vents, sleek chairs with perfect lumbar support, and a long obsidian table polished to a gleam. Usually, voices rose only in measured strategy sessions, punctuated by nods of approval and market forecasts. But today, the calm was fragile, balancing on a knife's edge. Sloane sat at the head of the table, posture controlled, her fingers steepled lightly beneath her chin. The room was full. Board members, legal advisors, and public relations liaisons. Reports and digital briefs had been circulated ahead of time, but few dared to speak first. "I understand this has become a national matter," said Harold Choi, Jet Air's general counsel. "The DHS investigation is moving quickly. TSA has issued a formal apology for the incident, and the agent involved is still on leave pending termination." Across the table, someone cleared their throat. Vincent Rowe. He hadn't spoken during the opening updates, but now he leaned forward, his jacket shifting as he laced his fingers together. His eyes met Sloane's. Sharp, unreadable. "Let's not pretend we're in uncharted waters here," he said casually. "We've weathered turbulence before. Social media outrage cycles burn hot, then fade. If we manage the optics right, the brand survives untouched." Sloane didn't react right away. She watched him, waiting for the rest. Vincent smirked slightly. "No need to escalate something that's already cooling." A few members exchanged glances. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Too smooth, too rehearsed, as if he'd already written the ending and was just waiting for the rest of them to follow his script. Sloane didn't flinch. "I wasn't aware protecting public dignity was an escalation," she said, "or that being racially profiled in one of our partner terminals was a temporary inconvenience." Vincent shrugged, leaning back. "I'm not minimizing what happened to you, Sloane, but if we position this as a personal incident rather than a systemic concern, we maintain control of the story. Keep things manageable. And if I'm not interested in managing it," he tilted his head, "then we risk becoming the story instead of leading it." There it was, thinly veiled, but present. Control the narrative. Redirect the blame. Silence the risk. Her mind drifted, just for a moment, back to the documents on Glenna Reyes's desk. The security log with the anonymous tip. The deliberate targeting. The calculated moment of humiliation. It wasn't just profiling. It had been crafted to look like profiling. Subtle enough to spark outrage, but vague enough to be dismissed as coincidence, unless you knew where to look. Unless you knew who had reason. 2 years ago, Vincent Rowe had been forced to step down after Sloane's audit exposed conflicts of interest in supplier contracts, secret dealings that enriched a personal shell company tied to his family name. He denied everything, fought the board's decision, claimed her investigation was personal. But the evidence was clear, and the board voted unanimously to remove him. He had stayed quiet since then, cashing out a large portion of his shares, but holding on to just enough to keep a non-voting presence. Symbolic? Irrelevant? Or so she had thought. But now, sitting across from him, watching his carefully measured words, she saw it clearly. He hadn't forgotten, and he had waited. Sloane pressed a button on the console in front of her. A digital chart illuminated the wall behind her. "This is not a personal incident," she said, her voice controlled. "This is a reflection of a much larger truth. The public doesn't just want an apology. They want reform. Our response will be measured, yes, but it will be decisive. We will lead, not hide." Some board members nodded. Others looked uncertain. Vincent just smiled like he was watching a slow game unfold. Certain he had the better pieces. After the meeting, Sloane lingered in the room alone, reviewing notes, her thoughts cycling between Glenna's discovery and Vincent's smirk. Her gut told her everything she needed to know, but she needed more than instinct. She needed proof. A knock at the glass door broke her focus. Tia Ramsey stood outside, phone in hand, notebook tucked under her arm. She wore a neutral blazer and jeans, her hair pulled back, her face set with something between curiosity and conviction. Sloane hesitated before motioning for her to enter. "I wasn't expecting you today," Sloane said. "I reached out to Raina," Tia replied. "She said you'd be here." She stepped inside, her voice softer now. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider sitting down for a real interview. Not just a statement, not just a quote in someone else's narrative. Your story, in your words." Sloane raised an eyebrow. "I'm not comfortable turning this into a spotlight." "I don't think it's about comfort anymore," Tia said. "I think it's about momentum. People are listening. You have the opportunity to shape something lasting. You're not just speaking for yourself anymore." Sloane looked down at the papers on her desk. Photocopies of TSA policy, internal security logs, Glenna's highlighted notes. A voice inside her still resisted the idea of putting herself forward. She had spent years building power through excellence, not exposure. Her work was supposed to speak for itself. But now, it wasn't enough. Someone had tried to silence her in plain sight, and the only way to fight silence was with clarity. "I'll think about it," she said. Tia gave a slow nod, understanding the weight of that answer. She didn't push. She simply offered a quiet thank you and turned to leave. When the door closed behind her, Sloane remained still. Then she turned back to her whiteboard. She drew a box around Vincent's name and connected it to a new word: leak. Whatever this was, personal vendetta, systemic sabotage, or both, it wasn't over. And the next move would be hers. The leak hit late on a Thursday night, just before the 11 o'clock news cycle, when editors scramble for a lead story and viewers settle in for one last scroll before sleep. By morning, it was everywhere. An internal TSA report, stamped "Confidential, not for release," had been uploaded to an anonymous file-sharing site. The digital trail was impossible to trace, routed through firewalls and proxies, but the content was unmistakably real. The report confirmed what many had already suspected. Sloane Carter's identification had cleared all levels of verification. Her boarding pass had scanned without issue. Her name did not appear on any watch list. Her federal credentials had pinged the system and triggered an automatic bypass flag, standard for executives with FAA and DOT clearance, and yet a manual override had been executed. The report cited Agent K. Brenner manually initiated secondary screening based on visual concern and verbal inconsistency. In plain language, Brenner had ignored the clearance protocol and flagged Sloane anyway, based on how she looked and how she sounded. The leak included more than just the report. A spreadsheet attached to the same file revealed that Brenner had initiated similar overrides dozens of times in the past 2 years, disproportionately against black and brown women, often using similar language. Didn't match ID photo. Tone was evasive. Behavior seemed off. No formal disciplinary action had ever been taken. The timing of the leak was surgical. TSA scrambled to respond, but the damage was already done. The phrase "visual concern" started trending within hours. Commentators dissected the euphemism with clinical fury. Civil rights groups called for congressional oversight. Editorials compared the override to profiling in uniform. The press smelled a cover-up, and the public knew exactly who to rally behind. Sloane Carter wasn't just a CEO anymore. She had become a symbol of restraint, of grace, of precision in the face of humiliation. Every clip of her calm confrontation now played alongside the leak headlines. Every frame of her standing in silence, enduring the search, was recontextualized as evidence of a deeper rot. Outside Jet Air Dominion's headquarters, news vans clustered near the gates like birds circling a field. Anchors reported live from the sidewalk, speculating on TSA hearings, the whistleblower's identity, and the Department of Homeland Security's slow but steady pivot toward full-scale damage control. Inside the building, Sloane stood before her window, watching rain bead and roll down the glass. Her inbox was full. Her legal team was on standby. The Department of Transportation had requested a briefing, and Tia Ramsey was waiting in the media lounge downstairs. Sloane turned from the window and walked calmly toward the elevator. The interview setup was simple by design. No lights blazing, no corporate backdrop. Just 2 chairs, a quiet room, and a camera on a tripod. Tia sat opposite her, hands steady, eyes clear. The digital recorder blinked red. "Thank you for doing this," Tia said, her voice low. Sloane nodded once. "Let's begin." The questions started simple, about the incident, the day, the interaction with Brenner. Sloane answered in the same tone she used in boardrooms. Factual, controlled, but as the question shifted toward impact and meaning, something softened in her posture. "I've lived most of my professional life walking a very deliberate line," she said. "Earn your place. Don't make waves. Let your work speak for itself. That's what I believed would protect me." Tia didn't interrupt. "But protection only works if people see you as someone worth protecting. And what I learned, again, is that no title, no clearance, no resume is enough if someone has already decided who you are the moment they see you." Sloane's voice remained even, but there was weight behind each word now. "I wasn't angry when it happened," she continued. "I was quiet. Not because I lacked words, but because I knew they wouldn't be heard. People always ask why we stay calm in those moments, why we don't raise our voices. The truth is, we're taught that survival looks like composure." Tia leaned forward slightly. "What changed?" she asked. Sloane paused, then lifted her gaze. "I realized silence doesn't shield us. It only makes the next incident more likely. And I have a platform. I have access. I have the ability to make noise in a way that others can't. So if I don't speak now, then when?" The final moments of the interview passed in thoughtful quiet. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth, laid out clearly and calmly, the way only someone like Sloane Carter could. When it ended, Tia turned off the camera and said nothing for a long beat. Then she stood, walked around the table, and hugged her. Sloane didn't pull away. That evening, the interview aired in full across multiple digital platforms. Clips flooded social media. It was no longer just about a viral video or leaked documents. It was a woman sitting in front of a camera, telling the world how systems fail, even those at the very top. Public support surged again. Petitions called for TSA reform. An airline workers' union issued a statement demanding clearer accountability protocols for federal screeners. Journalists filed FOIA requests for every override command in the last 10 years. A quiet revolution was unfolding, one conversation at a time. Back at TSA headquarters, the internal hearing for Karen Brenner was expedited. The pressure was too loud. The evidence was too sharp. She was summoned for a full review, and Sloane Carter was far from finished. She had delivered the message. Now, she would begin the real work. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, but the room filled long before then. Rows of chairs lined the wood-paneled walls of the Federal Oversight Chamber, occupied by agency officials, civil rights observers, union representatives, and members of the media, each granted limited access. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but the room carried the hush of an auditorium before a performance, not of entertainment, but of judgment. At the center of it all sat Karen Brenner, her TSA-issued blazer buttoned tight, her expression carefully guarded. The weight of the past few weeks had pressed visibly into her frame. Her posture was straighter, her makeup heavier, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that the knuckles stood out pale against her skin. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Across from her, the panelists, an internal review committee composed of senior DHS officials and external accountability officers, organized their notes in silence. Each carried a binder thick with documents, redacted reports, video stills, screening logs, complaint histories. Everything that had been hidden or ignored for years was now catalogued, highlighted, and marked for formal review. One official cleared his throat. "We are convened today to review allegations of misconduct by Agent Karen Brenner, relating to the incident involving passenger Sloane Carter on April 3rd, as well as broader patterns of behavior documented during her tenure." Karen didn't flinch. The first hour was procedural. Protocols, definitions, agency policies. Then the facts began. They started with Sloane's incident. ID validation logs showing her credentials were legitimate and cleared within 3 seconds of scanning. Brenner's override command issued less than 1 second later. A voice recording of her call to secondary screening, transcribed and time-stamped, included her saying, "She doesn't match the ID photo. Something's not right." The ID photo, of course, was accurate. Then came the patterns. Case after case. Dozens surfaced across the years. Travelers flagged for subjective reasons, all matching a specific profile. Mostly black, mostly women, often traveling alone. Several had filed complaints, quietly tucked away with vague resolutions. Inconclusive. Insufficient documentation. Addressed internally. But now the pattern was undeniable. A representative from the Civil Liberties Review Board stepped forward. She read aloud anonymized excerpts from passenger testimonies. One woman described being detained with her infant for 30 minutes. Another recalled being asked invasive questions about her finances. A third recounted how her documents were returned with visible contempt and no explanation. The panel gave Brenner space to respond. She adjusted her collar. Her voice, when it came, was firm, but not confident. "I followed protocol," she said. "Every override was made in the interest of safety." A panelist leaned forward. "Explain how safety required ignoring a federal clearance notice recognized by TSA's own systems." Brenner opened her mouth, but no answer came. Another voice followed. "And how safety justified disproportionately flagging women of color for secondary searches." Brenner shifted in her seat, her voice tightening. "It's not about race. It never was. I trust my instincts." One of the panelists, a former federal judge, tilted his head slightly. "Instinct is not a substitute for training," he said quietly. "And it is not above accountability." There was a pause. Then another official reached for a folder. "We also have a statement submitted by Ms. Sloane Carter, who has declined to attend today's hearing in person, but has offered written testimony." A rustle moved through the room as the envelope was opened. The chair of the panel began to read. "I chose not to be here today because I've already had my moment in that room," the letter began. "I've already stood where so many others have. Silently, patiently, being questioned for simply existing in a space where someone decided we didn't belong." The voice continued reading, steady and clear. "I do not write this for personal vindication. I write it because silence allows patterns to repeat. This is not about one agent. It is about a culture that rewards suspicion over service, assumption over accuracy, and power over dignity." Karen Brenner's expression cracked then, just slightly. Her shoulders dipped. Her jaw clenched. "This pattern should have been addressed long before I stepped into that checkpoint. The fact that it wasn't is not just a failure of one person, but of an entire system built to excuse behavior when it hides behind the shield of authority." The final words landed with precision. "I hope this hearing is not the end of your investigation, but the beginning of your reform." When the reading ended, the panel fell silent. For a long minute, no one spoke. Then the chair cleared his throat. "After review of the evidence, documentation, testimony, and the pattern of conduct, the committee has reached a unanimous conclusion." Karen didn't move. "You are hereby terminated from your position as a Transportation Security Administration agent, effective immediately." No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't celebration. This was reckoning. As Brenner stood, escorted from the room by an internal affairs officer, the press outside prepared for their turn. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. But the statement that carried furthest wasn't spoken aloud. It was printed, steady in the hands of every reporter. Sloane Carter's name, her words, Her message: inside TSA leadership, the internal culture cracked under scrutiny. A full audit of override practices was announced. Mandatory training on implicit bias was reinstated across all major terminals. Congressional aides began drafting language for a passenger dignity amendment under national travel guidelines. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. And Sloane Carter, who had not shouted, who had not raged, had made them all listen without stepping foot in the room. The day after Karen Brenner was terminated, Sloane's inbox filled with hundreds of messages, most supportive, many grateful, some deeply personal. Passengers shared their own painful stories, moments of humiliation quietly endured, now finally recognized. Civil rights groups offered thanks for her courage. Lawmakers praised her measured stance, and business leaders cautiously suggested collaboration. But scattered among the gratitude was something darker. First came anonymous emails, short, harsh, designed for impact. Some merely offensive, others explicitly threatening. Each message meant to intimidate, to push her back into silence, into invisibility. Then, slowly at first, paparazzi began to gather outside Jet Air Dominion headquarters, snapping photos as she arrived, as she left, turning her routine into public spectacle. They waited at restaurants, lingered near her apartment building, lenses pointed, flashes ready. Through it all, Sloane remained outwardly composed, carrying herself with the same steady dignity she'd shown since the beginning. But privately, she tightened her security detail, updated her home security system, and began to avoid public appearances whenever possible. She understood clearly now that visibility had its price, a price she had always preferred not to pay. On a quiet Sunday evening, as she stood alone in her office watching twilight settle over the city skyline, a gentle knock on her door brought her attention back to the present. Raina stepped inside, shutting the door quietly behind her. "Have you seen the latest?" she asked softly, holding up her phone, her eyes filled with concern. Sloane sighed lightly, meeting her niece's eyes with calm acceptance. "Which one?" Raina hesitated, biting her lip before showing her aunt the screen. Another hateful email, this one threatening more directly. Harsh words layered beneath careful anonymity, the kind of vague menace that thrived behind screens. "Aunt Sloane," Raina said gently but firmly, "this isn't just talk anymore. It's harassment. You need to take this to the authorities. File charges. Get this documented officially." Sloane considered it carefully. Her gaze drifted back toward the window, tracing the distant lights that blurred gently behind her reflection. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "It's not about fear," Raina insisted softly, stepping closer. "It's about accountability. You've already done so much to expose the problem, but you don't have to keep absorbing all of this alone. Reporting it shows others they don't have to accept it either." Sloane paused, knowing Raina was right. Silence wasn't protection anymore. Perhaps it never had been. Her lifelong habit of quiet endurance had made her strong, but had it also made her complicit? Had her silence, intended as composure, cost others their voices? "You're right," Sloane said finally, her voice steady. "Document everything. I'll file reports tomorrow." Raina relaxed visibly, relief filling her eyes. Sloane reached over, taking her niece's hand gently. "But filing reports won't fix the real issue," Sloane continued. "Emails can be traced, photographers can be managed, but bias, systemic bias, can't be removed by reacting. We have to prevent it. We have to lead the way." Raina nodded, understanding immediately what her aunt meant. "You want to move forward with the reforms?" "Yes," Sloane said decisively. "I've been drafting a new policy initiative for Jet Air Dominion. Starting this quarter, any airport security company we contract must implement comprehensive diversity training and bias intervention programs. Not optional, not advisory. Mandatory, annually reviewed, with measurable outcomes." She turned from the window, her eyes brighter now, voice clearer with purpose. "We'll start here, and then we'll invite others in the industry to join us." Within a week, the official announcement was made. Jet Air Dominion introduced the new protocol publicly, outlining rigorous anti-bias training, accountability audits, and diversity education for all airport security partners. The announcement echoed through the aviation industry like a clear bell, reverberating with resolve and challenging complacency. The response was immediate and profound. Initially, competitors were hesitant, wary of new obligations, concerned about logistics and costs. But as public support surged, they realized this was no longer optional. Passengers, advocacy groups, and even shareholders demanded follow-through. Within days, 2 other major airlines joined Jet Air Dominion's initiative. By the end of the month, nearly every national carrier followed suit. The industry had shifted, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Meanwhile, authorities investigated the threats Sloan had received, tracing several emails back to anonymous servers. Police patrolled more frequently near her apartment, and the paparazzi, warned away by legal injunctions, slowly retreated. Yet, even as these immediate pressures subsided, Sloan felt the lingering impact, the toll exacted by stepping forward. Visibility was exhausting. Change, more so. But when she arrived at work one morning to find her inbox flooded again, this time with stories from employees across multiple airlines describing relief, gratitude, even pride in their employer's stance against discrimination, she knew it was worth it. That afternoon, Raina brought her coffee and sat with her quietly. "How do you feel?" Raina asked softly, her eyes searching Sloane's face. "Tired," Sloane admitted honestly, "but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, I believe this could make things better. Not perfect, perhaps, but better." Raina smiled gently. "You've changed the conversation." "No," Sloane corrected warmly, her voice softening. "We've changed it. You, me, Glenna, Tia, everyone who refused to look away this time. Change isn't one moment, it's many, layered on top of each other until they become impossible to ignore." Her niece nodded thoughtfully. "What happens next?" Sloane paused, considering the enormity of the question. "Now we keep moving," she said. "This is just the start. Policy is written in moments, but cultures shift in years. This will take patience, endurance, and relentless oversight." Raina squeezed her aunt's hand gently, her voice confident and steady. "You're not alone this time," she said softly. Sloane nodded quietly, gratitude filling her expression. "I know," she replied. "That's why it'll work." Outside the office, the city continued moving, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding in the rooms above. But inside, change had already begun, powerful enough to outlast headlines, threats, and fear. For Sloane, the cost had been steep, but finally, undeniably, worth it. As threats grew louder, Sloane responded quietly but firmly, discreetly intensifying security measures at both her residence and Jet Air Dominion's corporate headquarters. Surveillance cameras increased subtly, extra security personnel patrolled more frequently, and entry procedures became quietly stricter. Changes made without public fanfare, but impossible to overlook internally. Outwardly, Sloane maintained impeccable composure, never allowing the external pressure to fracture her professional calm. Yet internally, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down with each passing day, knowing her choices were drawing the company deeper into uncertain territory. One late afternoon, Eric Denson, Jet Air's loyal and cautious operations manager, knocked gently at her open office door. Eric was dependable and pragmatic, the kind of manager who preferred incremental improvement to dramatic gestures. The look on his face was solemn, edged with an anxious hesitation that was becoming increasingly common among Jet Air's senior staff. "Sloane, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, stepping cautiously inside as she motioned him to sit. "Of course, Eric," Sloane replied gently, closing her laptop and giving him her undivided attention. "What's troubling you?" Eric settled into the chair slowly, shifting uncomfortably as he searched for the right words. "The new security measures. They're making people uneasy," he began carefully. "There's growing concern internally that we might be drawing unnecessary attention to ourselves. Not everyone is comfortable being in the middle of a national debate. Sloane listened attentively, her expression neutral but empathetic. I understand it's unsettling. Change, especially change driven by controversy, is rarely comfortable, she said calmly. Eric hesitated briefly, then pressed further, his voice quieter. But Sloane, some people worry about provoking opposition we might not be able to control. There are influential interests out there who prefer the status quo. Powerful people who might see Jet Air's stance as a threat. She nodded slowly, absorbing his concerns without dismissing them. Eric's unease mirrored a larger anxiety within the company, an understandable reaction to the unprecedented attention Jet Air Dominion now attracted. I know this is difficult, she said firmly, yet compassionately. But meaningful change rarely happens without friction. If we wait for comfort, we wait forever. We can't shy away just because it's difficult. He let out a deep breath, visibly reassured by her steady tone, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. I trust your judgment, he finally said softly, his voice steadier now. But we have to be careful. We're not just talking about policies. We're changing the conversation itself. Sloane smiled gently. That's exactly why we must continue. Careful, yes, but never passive. We have a responsibility now that we've begun this. Others are watching. The choices we make will set the tone not only for our industry, but beyond. Eric rose slowly, nodding. I'll communicate your position clearly, he said, visibly calmed by her resolve. If anyone can guide us through this, it's you. After he left, Sloane remained at her desk, reflecting deeply. Eric's concerns had merit. Jet Air's visibility was a double-edged sword, but retreat was no longer an option. Her thoughts shifted to Raina's words, the passionate insistence of a younger generation unwilling to trade justice for corporate convenience. 2 days later, in a closed-door meeting with a select group of Jet Air's senior executives, Sloane invited Raina to sit beside her. As they discussed the deeper implications of the company's emerging policies, Raina's presence was at first met with polite skepticism. But skepticism faded quickly once she spoke. This moment demands more than symbolic gestures, Raina said clearly, her voice confident, her passion undeniable. Your silence in the past may have protected your company's reputation temporarily, but it also preserved a broken system. A system that can only persist if no one speaks against it. Right now, we have a rare opportunity to reshape this conversation. If Jet Air Dominion backs away from meaningful reform now, it sends a clear message. Appearances matter more than justice. Executives exchanged cautious glances, some uneasy, others intrigued. Sloane watched proudly as Raina navigated the room with a confidence she herself had learned only recently. After years of careful silence, Raina continued, voice sharp with insight. If your discomfort now is because you fear controversy, consider how uncomfortable it is for those who suffer in silence daily. If we have the power to speak up and still choose silence, we become complicit in everything that happens afterward. The room grew quiet, her words settling heavily. Even the most reluctant executives nodded slowly, absorbing the implications. Afterward, as others filed out, Sloane remained seated, quietly reflecting on her niece's passion and clarity. Raina had articulated truths that Sloane herself had avoided confronting in the past. How many times had she chosen expedience over advocacy? How often had her silence unintentionally enabled injustices she hadn't fully grasped at the time? Late that evening, alone in her office, Sloane began compiling a meticulous personal record of her experiences. A private audit of the subtle yet persistent biases she'd observed throughout her career. Pages filled quickly, accounts of uncomfortable boardroom conversations, hiring discussions tainted by unconscious assumptions, promotions quietly influenced by unspoken expectations. As she documented each incident, patterns emerged clearly. Systemic bias wasn't just embedded in airport checkpoints. It had infiltrated corporate structures at every level, often quietly, always insidiously. Recognition of this truth hardened Sloane's determination into something lasting and resolute, and she worked quietly into the night, drafting new internal protocols, transparency in hiring and promotions, mandatory diversity education at the executive level, accountability standards for leadership evaluations, each measure deliberately constructed to dismantle biases that had previously flourished behind corporate silence. As dawn approached, she finally stopped, closing her files and looking out over the awakening city. Jet Air Dominion had become a lightning rod for controversy, but that position also meant it could become a beacon for real change. She felt no fear now, only the quiet strength of certainty. Sloane had spent her entire career mastering silence, but it was clarity that would become her true legacy. In the weeks following Jet Air Dominion's announcement of comprehensive diversity and anti-bias reforms, the expected corporate backlash never fully materialized. Instead, what emerged was quieter, more surprising, and infinitely more powerful. Discreet support, whispered encouragement from unlikely sources within the aviation industry itself. At first, it began with a single encrypted message, arriving late one evening as Sloane reviewed policy documents in the quiet of her home office. The sender was unexpected, a senior executive from a rival airline, historically known for fiercely competitive practices. The message itself was brief, cautious, yet unmistakably sincere. "Ms. Carter, I commend your courage. Privately, many of us know you're right, but publicly, we remain silent out of fear. Don't stop now. This industry needs you." She read the words multiple times, feeling an unexpected warmth as well as frustration at the tacit acknowledgement of widespread fear among her peers. Soon after, similar confidential messages trickled in. Airline presidents, chief executives of airport management groups, high-ranking industry consultants, each echoing cautious support, quietly acknowledging the entrenched biases that permeated aviation but remained unaddressed due to a pervasive fear of disruption and retaliation. The messages were cautious but consistent. "We see what you're doing. We wish we could say the same." Each note, though discreet, strengthened Sloane's resolve, reinforcing her determination to push the conversation beyond Jet Air Dominion's own reforms and into the broader industry. Each new ally represented more than quiet acknowledgement. They became silent but powerful potential partners for future, wider efforts. Among the messages came a particularly surprising one from Tia Ramsey. Since their interview, Tia's social media following had soared, her platform becoming a powerful amplifier for discussions around airport discrimination, dignity in travel, and accountability within transportation agencies. Now, her message was both personal and strategic. "Sloane, my inbox has become flooded with travelers' stories. The volume is overwhelming, but every story echoes your own. We're onto something much bigger here. Can we talk privately? I think it's time we turn these individual stories into sustained pressure for broader reforms," Sloane replied without hesitation, and within days, the two women met discreetly, mapping out careful messaging strategies. Together, they developed a plan to sustain momentum, balancing Sloane's corporate credibility with Tia's influential public voice. The goal was clear: to maintain persistent pressure on TSA, DHS, and airport management groups without putting Jet Air Dominion at unnecessary risk. They drafted messages carefully, precise statements designed to mobilize public sentiment without provoking undue hostility. This partnership, quietly formed, had immediate impact. Industry dialogue subtly shifted. Companies that had previously remained silent began cautiously acknowledging systemic issues, prompted by increasing public expectation. The aviation community felt pressure, recognizing Jet Air Dominion not as a competitor exploiting controversy, but as a leader facilitating overdue conversations. As public momentum increased, another critical ally reemerged: investigative journalist Glenna Reyes. She contacted Sloane privately, her voice steady and analytical as always, but her findings far deeper than previously realized. Brenner's behavior wasn't isolated, Glenna explained carefully during a late-night phone call. My investigation uncovered significant complicity within TSA leadership. Brenner was tolerated, even quietly rewarded, for actions that made the TSA appear proactive, regardless of the underlying prejudice. It's a deeply ingrained bureaucratic issue, extending beyond a single checkpoint or even one agent. Sloane absorbed the information silently, her mind quickly processing the implications. This isn't just negligence, it's institutional complicity, she said finally, her voice heavy but determined. Exactly, Glenna affirmed. Your experience is merely the tip of an iceberg. If you push deeper, you're going to expose powerful interests that have a stake in maintaining the current culture. Sloane considered this carefully, understanding fully what Glenna meant. I'm prepared for that, she responded quietly. Armed with Glenna's insights, Sloane carefully approached Jet Air Dominion's senior executives during confidential meetings, gradually sharing critical elements of Glenna's findings. She spoke clearly and candidly, emphasizing the gravity of institutional inertia within TSA, how deep the problem ran, and why comprehensive reform couldn't stop at Jet Air's internal measures alone. She noted quietly but firmly, the reforms we've introduced are significant, but if we genuinely seek lasting change, our work must extend outward. We must become leaders not just within Jet Air Dominion, but across aviation. This means openly acknowledging complicity and challenging institutionalized bias wherever it exists, even when confronting powerful interests. Initially, reactions among executives varied. Unease, quiet fear, hesitant acceptance, but each conversation gradually solidified an internal coalition. Quiet support grew, shaped by Sloane's calm yet relentless insistence that remaining silent now was no longer defensible. Late into the evenings, Sloane continued quietly building her detailed documentation, meticulously compiling each instance of industry bias she had personally encountered or observed. Her records became a profound resource, not merely cataloging injustices, but providing a clear roadmap for future systemic reform. One evening, Raina entered her office softly, finding her aunt immersed in thought, papers carefully spread across her desk. She placed a warm mug of tea beside Sloane, studying her carefully. "You're working late again," she remarked gently. Sloane nodded quietly. "Change demands patience, Raina, but also vigilance. This isn't about a single confrontation. It's about shifting an entire culture. And cultures don't shift overnight. We have to sustain this." Raina smiled softly, sitting opposite her aunt, eyes shining with pride. "You're no longer standing alone, though. Others are beginning to stand quietly beside you." "Yes," Sloane agreed, smiling gently. "But quiet support is only the start. Eventually, we need those voices raised. We must move beyond anonymous messages to open dialogue. That's our next step, turning quiet support into lasting change." Sloane leaned back thoughtfully, glancing out the window at the illuminated city beyond. She had always preferred quiet strength, building her career carefully, deliberately avoiding the spotlight. But now she recognized silence had lost its appeal. Her legacy would not be quiet. It would be clear, unambiguous, rooted in truth and integrity. Raina watched her aunt thoughtfully, sensing her deep resolve. "Are you ready for what comes next?" she asked softly. Sloane turned, meeting her niece's gaze, calm but resolute. "More than ready," she answered. "We're building something here, not just for ourselves, but for everyone coming after us. Now is exactly the right time." With allies quietly aligning behind the scenes and industry-wide momentum steadily building, Sloane knew the escalating harassment she'd endured was neither random nor spontaneous. Determined to uncover the truth, She discreetly commissioned an investigative team composed of seasoned cybersecurity experts and private analysts. Quietly, efficiently, they sifted through a tangled web of encrypted emails, anonymous messages, and digital footprints, meticulously piecing together a pattern designed to remain hidden. Days turned into weeks as analysts painstakingly traced anonymous threats through proxy servers, digital tunnels, and encryption layers deliberately designed to obfuscate. Each message analyzed, each hostile email dissected, led them further down a carefully constructed trail that pointed directly toward calculated sabotage. Then, late one rainy evening, the investigative team gathered quietly in Sloane's office, their findings laid out clearly on her desk. Their lead analyst spoke first, voice steady but cautious, knowing the gravity of his revelation. "We've confirmed a direct link," he began carefully, pointing to a carefully highlighted document. "The anonymous tip flagging you to TSA came from a private server registered under a shell company. We've definitively traced ownership back to Vincent Rowe." Sloane absorbed the information calmly, but inwardly, a deep chill settled within her chest. The implications were clear. Rowe hadn't simply leveraged an opportunity. He had engineered it meticulously. His actions represented far more than mere retaliation for his dismissal. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to destabilize her leadership and humiliate her publicly. "Rowe has been quietly communicating with individuals connected to TSA security," the analyst continued, producing further documentation. "Emails indicate he specifically instructed them how and when to flag your identification, knowing exactly when you'd be traveling, and deliberately ensuring maximum public embarrassment." Sloane reviewed each document carefully, silently assessing every piece of irrefutable evidence. The depth of Rowe's betrayal was startling, yet confirmed something she had privately suspected. The sabotage wasn't merely personal. It was intended to undermine her credibility as a leader, weakening her authority and sowing internal chaos within Jet Air Dominion. She took a slow, steady breath, maintaining her outward composure. "We keep this confidential," she instructed quietly. "Organize all the evidence methodically. Prepare it carefully for presentation. I want no mistakes or oversights." Her investigative team nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of discretion. With quiet determination, Sloane knew impulsive retaliation wasn't the answer. Instead, her response would be strategic, precise, and carefully orchestrated. Over the next several days, she quietly secured support from select trusted board members, approaching each privately to share preliminary insights. Each conversation was calm, factual, deliberate. Sloane's measured approach ensured no rumors spread prematurely, allowing her to build a quiet but powerful coalition committed to collective action against Rowe's betrayal. Simultaneously, Raina stepped confidently into an expanded role, assisting Sloane in drafting reassuring internal communication. Together, they carefully crafted messages designed to quell anxiety among Jet Air's nervous staff, providing measured reassurance without prematurely revealing specifics. Raina's eloquence and clarity brought calm stability to internal discussions, helping employees navigate uncertainty with renewed trust in the company's leadership. Late into the evenings, Sloane meticulously refined her presentation, every detail arranged to methodically dismantle Rowe's scheme piece by piece. Charts, timelines, digital trails, everything was compiled into a narrative so compelling it left no doubt about the depth of his calculated malice. Her approach was quietly ruthless, devoid of dramatics or emotion, focused solely on truth and clarity. One evening, as she reviewed final documents, Raina entered her office quietly, placing fresh coffee beside her aunt. "You're still here," Raina remarked gently, settling into the seat across from her. "Are you feeling prepared?" Sloane looked up from her papers, meeting her niece's gaze calmly but sincerely. "More than ever," she replied softly. "This confrontation will be difficult, but it's necessary. Rowe represents more than a personal vendetta. He embodies the very systemic biases and retaliations that keep injustice thriving. Raina nodded thoughtfully, studying her aunt's expression carefully. You're turning what he meant for harm into something powerful, something lasting. That's exactly the intent, Sloane replied, conviction strengthening her voice. If we expose this clearly, it sends a message beyond jet air. Corporate retaliation, systemic discrimination. None of these thrive unless good people choose to remain quiet. Raina smiled warmly, visibly proud of her aunt's unwavering resolve. Then this fight matters more now than ever. The evening before the board meeting, Sloane remained in her office, contemplating the city's softly glowing skyline. Her reflection in the window was calm, steady, determined. For years, she had built a career rooted in quiet excellence, but Roe's betrayal had pushed her into an uncomfortable yet essential position: visible leadership against systemic injustice. Tomorrow's confrontation wouldn't simply address Roe's actions. It would publicly expose corporate complicity and institutional bias, forcing jet air and the aviation industry itself toward accountability and lasting reform. She knew many eyes would watch closely, not just within jet air dominion, but industry-wide. Her composure, clarity, and strength tomorrow would determine how deep these reforms reached, how lasting their impact became. Sloane took a slow breath, steadying herself for the pivotal confrontation ahead. Quietly, yet firmly, she felt a calm assurance fill her chest. She wasn't merely reacting now, she was leading. In exposing Vincent Roe's sabotage, she wouldn't just silence a personal enemy. She would set a precedent for corporate accountability, integrity, and transparency. Roe had underestimated her, mistaking quiet strength for weakness. But now, the quietness had shifted into precise clarity. A clarity powerful enough to inspire meaningful change. Sloane gathered her papers carefully, secured them quietly in her briefcase, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow's board meeting was no longer something to dread. It was something to embrace, a turning point she had meticulously prepared for. She stepped confidently toward the elevators, fully aware that this confrontation would redefine Jet Air Dominion's future, her own leadership, and the standards of the aviation industry itself. The morning of the board meeting was clear and bright, sunlight filtering softly through the expansive windows lining Jet Air Dominion's executive boardroom. Sloane arrived early, setting out carefully prepared materials before the other board members arrived. Her manner remained impeccably composed, her hands steady as she arranged her documents neatly, the evidence carefully structured for maximum impact. Soon, the room filled. Board members filed quietly into their seats, exchanging cautious nods, many sensing the gravity of the moment, even if its full scope wasn't yet clear. Vincent Roe arrived last, confident and relaxed, his usual air of controlled superiority intact. He settled into his seat comfortably, eyes briefly meeting Sloane's, a faint, unreadable smile tugging at his lips. The meeting began quietly with routine reports and procedural items, but the air remained tense, awaiting resolution. Finally, Sloane stood calmly, her posture poised, her eyes clear and focused, as she addressed the room directly. "I have one more important matter to present today," she announced, her voice steady, authoritative without aggression. "An issue directly tied to Jet Air Dominion's integrity, our leadership, and our future." All eyes shifted toward her. Vincent straightened subtly in his seat, sensing an unexpected shift. "In recent months," she continued deliberately, "our company faced unprecedented challenges, not just from external pressure, but from deliberate sabotage initiated from within." A murmur swept quietly through the room, but Sloane raised her hand gently, reclaiming silence effortlessly. "Today, I present clear evidence that the harassment and public humiliation I experienced, including the anonymous TSA tip that started it all, was intentionally orchestrated by someone familiar with Jet Air's internal processes, schedules, and personal travel plans. Someone sitting in this room." She clicked the projector remote once, and detailed records appeared on screen. Emails, server logs, timestamps. Each slide was precise, meticulously outlined by dates and clear, undeniable connections. A series of confidential exchanges displayed Vincent Rowe's name unmistakably, along with his documented communications with intermediaries tied to TSA security. Gasps and whispers spread across the table as board members comprehended the gravity of her presentation. Vincent's expression remained outwardly calm, but a shadow passed quickly through his eyes. A fleeting flicker of alarm. "Vincent," Sloane said, turning directly toward him, her voice calm and unwavering, "these records unequivocally link you to the anonymous tip and the subsequent harassment campaign. Your intent was clear. Not only personal retaliation for your dismissal, but deliberate destabilization of Jet Air Dominion's leadership and reputation." He leaned forward slightly, forcing a dismissive smile, attempting to maintain his composure. "This is ridiculous," he said evenly, his voice controlled but tight. "An elaborate misunderstanding at best. Malicious fabrication at worst." Sloane responded without anger, simply clicking forward to another slide. Encrypted messages decrypted by cybersecurity analysts, revealing Rowe's explicit directives. "Misunderstandings rarely come with detailed instructions," she replied quietly, her tone unshakably firm. "This was deliberate, Vincent, carefully planned and executed." He glanced around quickly, assessing the reactions of board members whose expressions ranged from shock to quiet outrage. "This is nonsense," Rowe said, his voice rising slightly. "You've been manipulated, Sloane. You're overreacting to circumstantial evidence." Sloane stood steady, unruffled, her response precise and clear. "The board will review the documentation independently, but today we must address the immediate issue of your involvement. Your actions have compromised the trust, stability, and reputation of this company. Standards we have all worked diligently to uphold." The board chair, a respected elder stateswoman named Evelyn Harper, finally spoke, her voice quiet yet authoritative. "Vincent, the evidence presented here today is both troubling and conclusive. Given your past actions and this clear breach of ethical standards, it is my recommendation, and I trust the unanimous decision of this board, that your relationship with Jet Air Dominion be terminated immediately and permanently." Vincent stared at Evelyn, momentarily stunned into silence, realizing he had lost control of the room entirely. No allies rose to defend him. No protests came forth. He looked briefly back at Sloane, finally recognizing the calm inevitability in her expression. The board voted swiftly and unanimously. Minutes later, security quietly escorted Vincent from the room. As he passed, his expression was a mix of disbelief, embarrassment, and tightly controlled anger. But Sloane remained composed, watching without satisfaction or bitterness, only a deep, quiet sense of relief. With Rowe gone, a sense of closure settled quietly over the room. Board members looked at one another solemnly, acknowledging the gravity of their decision. Evelyn turned gently to Sloane. "Thank you for bringing this forward," Evelyn said softly, "and for handling it with integrity and clarity. We'll ensure this never happens again." Sloane nodded gently. "Thank you. This was necessary not only for Jet Air Dominion, but for our industry's future." In the weeks that followed, news of Rowe's dismissal quietly spread through industry circles, bringing subtle but lasting change. Sloane's experience highlighted deeper structural issues: corporate complicity, systemic bias, and institutional tolerance of retaliation. The incident sparked discreet conversations among airline executives nationwide. Rather than basking in victory, Sloane quietly leveraged this momentum, reaching out personally to airline CEOs, forming a coalition committed to addressing structural bias at airports across America. Each conversation was cautious but productive, leaders quietly acknowledging the need for action and collaboration. Within months, what started as discreet, private discussions evolved into a formal industry coalition, spearheaded by Jet Air Dominion, with Sloan at its helm. Industry leaders met regularly, sharing best practices, implementing uniform anti-bias standards, and collectively demanding transparency and reform from airport security partners. The confrontation with Vincent Rowe marked more than the resolution of a personal vendetta. It signified a deeper, collective commitment toward genuine change. For Sloan, this moment brought a sense of quiet closure, not through public vindication alone, but by purging a long-standing threat from within Jet Air's ranks and redirecting her company's trajectory toward true integrity and accountability. Standing quietly in her office, gazing across the city's skyline that evening, she felt deep satisfaction, a quiet pride, not just for herself, but for the lasting change now underway. The difficult journey had not broken her. Instead, it had strengthened her resolve and transformed Jet Air Dominion's leadership into something quietly formidable and genuinely transformative. Several months after the confrontation that purged Jet Air Dominion of its internal threat and sparked sweeping industry reforms, Sloan found herself once again at the airport terminal, preparing to board another commercial flight. This time, her journey was intentionally low-key. No entourage, no announcements, no special arrangements, just a passenger moving quietly among others, observing firsthand the impact of all she had fought to achieve. She approached the TSA checkpoint calmly, her carry-on bag gliding softly alongside her. As always, she watched carefully, assessing every detail, the rhythm of the lines, the tone of interactions, the subtle cues that defined passenger experiences. But today, she noticed the differences immediately. Gone were the tense stares and silent judgments that once dominated the checkpoint. Instead, there was a quiet professionalism, a respectful efficiency, and something deeper, a sense of careful awareness replacing suspicion. The TSA agents were visibly more diverse, their interactions with passengers less hurried, more human. Travelers moved through smoothly, dignity intact, identities respected. Sloan paused briefly to watch a young black family approach the security line. The father calmly presented their boarding passes and identification. The mother gently guided their two young children, speaking quietly, reassuringly. They proceeded without disruption, the agents smiling, helpful rather than intrusive, offering clear instructions and gentle assistance. No unnecessary delays, no tense moments, only the smooth, dignified passage that every traveler deserved. Something stirred deeply within Sloan's chest as she observed the quiet normalcy unfolding before her. This was the change she had envisioned, the powerful simplicity of fairness made visible through clear, consistent action. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't headline-grabbing, but it was profound, quietly reshaping thousands of daily interactions at airports across the country. As she moved forward in line herself, Sloan caught sight of a young girl, no more than 10 or 11 years old, standing quietly with her parents in an adjacent line. The girl watched Sloan carefully, curiosity and recognition dawning slowly in her eyes, turning quickly to admiration. It was the gentle, quiet awe of someone seeing a hero in everyday life, a powerful reminder of the impact Sloan's actions had reached far beyond her own experience. Sloan returned the young girl's gaze with a gentle, reassuring smile, holding her eyes briefly. In that quiet moment, she felt a profound connection, a shared understanding that change, real and lasting, was quietly within reach. For the first time, Sloan realized fully that she had become a symbol, not just of resilience, but of genuine transformation. A symbol the young girl, and countless others, could look to and see a future defined by integrity rather than fear. Passing through the checkpoint herself moments later, Sloan noticed the agent who checked her identification and boarding pass. A young man, meticulous yet courteous, greeting passengers with quiet professionalism. He studied her documents briefly, verified them, and returned them smoothly without unnecessary scrutiny. "Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Carter," he said politely, recognition flickering subtly behind his eyes. Not suspicion, not surprise, just respectful acknowledgement. "Thank you," Sloane replied warmly, meaning it genuinely. She collected her belongings and continued toward her gate, carrying a renewed sense of hope and quiet pride. Boarding the flight a short while later, she settled comfortably into her seat, reflecting quietly as the plane filled steadily around her. Boarding the flight a short while later, she settled comfortably into her seat, reflecting quietly as the plane filled steadily around her. Passengers moved calmly through the aisle, exchanging polite greetings with crew members. Flight attendants, diverse and attentive, quietly ensured everyone's comfort. The energy on board was peaceful, respectful, efficient, the quiet yet powerful culmination of policies and reforms carefully crafted, tirelessly advocated, and now visibly real. During the flight, as Sloane watched clouds pass silently below, she reflected on the journey she had taken, both personally and professionally. The confrontation with Vincent Rowe had forced her into visibility she had never sought. Yet from it had emerged something profoundly transformative, not only for herself and Jet Air Dominion, but for the broader aviation industry. The coalition she now led quietly but powerfully worked every day, continuing to dismantle systemic bias, advocating transparency, accountability, and genuine respect across airports nationwide. The path had been difficult, fraught with uncertainty and risk. Threats, backlash, and resistance had tested her resolve at every turn. Yet today, observing quietly from her seat, seeing firsthand the meaningful, visible impact of the changes she had set into motion, she knew it had been unquestionably worthwhile. Upon landing, as passengers began to rise and gather their belongings, Sloane found herself quietly smiling. This was how meaningful change was measured. Not in loud declarations or flashy press conferences, but in quiet moments like these, where dignity was restored, where fairness became normal, where power was no longer invisible, but something clearly felt, respected, and shared by all. Stepping into the terminal, she paused briefly, appreciating the calm hum of travelers moving steadily through the concourse. Her phone buzzed gently, messages from fellow CEOs, coalition partners, and industry advocates continuing their collective work. Each message quietly reinforced that change was now industry-wide. Not isolated incidents, but lasting systemic reform. She replied briefly, warmly, confident in their ongoing efforts. Each step forward represented meaningful progress, guided by the quiet strength of shared purpose, accountability, and unwavering integrity. Leaving the terminal, Sloane took a deep breath of crisp air, savoring the gentle clarity it brought. The invisible clearance she'd once been denied had finally become fully visible, recognized, respected, and now permanently affirmed. Across the curb, waiting patiently by her car, stood Raina, smiling proudly. As their eyes met, Sloane felt a quiet yet powerful certainty. The future was no longer shaped by silence or fear, but by the confident, clear voices of those who refused to remain invisible. Together, aunt and niece stood quietly, recognizing the profound truth of the moment, knowing clearly that the fight had been worth it, and that together they had quietly transformed not only one company or one industry, but the future itself. For Sloane Carter, power had finally become visible, and in its visibility had finally become genuinely shared. The expansive auditorium of the National Aviation Summit buzzed with anticipation, the quiet hum of hundreds of conversations softly blending into a steady, expectant rhythm. Bright stage lights illuminated the wide platform, casting gentle shadows across rows filled with industry leaders, government officials, journalists, and advocacy groups gathered from around the country. Everyone knew exactly why they were there. Not merely to hear speeches, but to witness the culmination of a movement quietly, but irrevocably reshaping the aviation industry itself. When Sloane Carter stepped onto the stage, The auditorium settled into immediate, respectful silence. She paused briefly at the podium, scanning the vast audience carefully, absorbing the collective attention of people who now fully recognized not just her name or title, but her profound significance as an advocate, an agent of change. Her posture was confident, her expression calm. Yet behind her steady gaze lay something deeper, an undeniable quiet strength forged through resilience, courage, and clarity. "Good morning," she began, her voice measured yet firm, effortlessly filling the expansive room. "I'm here today not simply to share a story, but to affirm a vision of aviation not merely as transportation, but as a space defined by dignity, respect, and equity for every passenger who travels through our airports every day." Sloane paused momentarily, allowing her opening words to settle deeply into the audience's awareness. "Months ago, I was publicly humiliated by an act of bias designed to silence me. Yet that moment, intended to weaken my voice, instead amplified it, not through anger, but through clarity and purpose. My experience was not unique. It was simply visible. For far too long, countless travelers have quietly endured similar indignities in silence, convinced speaking out was pointless, perhaps even dangerous. She continued deliberately, her voice unwavering but quietly powerful. "We must reject silence now, not only when it's convenient, but especially when it's uncomfortable. The systemic biases embedded in our airport security protocols do not disappear because we refuse to acknowledge them. They persist, invisible yet potent, quietly harming thousands every year. We must recognize clearly that dignity and fairness cannot remain optional. They must be mandated." A ripple of acknowledgement moved quietly through the audience, a subtle shifting in seats, heads nodding gently in agreement. Sloane's voice resonated clearly, calmly. "Today, I call for a federal mandate ensuring passenger dignity, transparent oversight, and comprehensive anti-bias standards at every U.S. airport checkpoint. We need federal oversight reforms and clear accountability protocols to guarantee no passenger experiences humiliation or profiling due to prejudice disguised as protocol. Today, we must all commit, airlines, airports, regulators, and lawmakers alike, to ending the silence and enshrining dignity as a fundamental standard in travel." She paused again, the weight of her call to action lingering clearly in the room, felt deeply by every person present. "My story began with a quiet indignity, but it will not end there. My voice is only one, but it is powerful, because it is joined by yours. Together, we can make systemic change visible, lasting, and meaningful." Her final words settled powerfully across the auditorium, holding firm in the charged silence that followed. Then, the silence broke, replaced by a wave of powerful applause that surged through the auditorium, resonating with genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Executives rose, lawmakers nodded decisively, journalists documented the moment. The applause was more than acknowledgement. It was a declaration, a unified commitment that something important had shifted, something fundamental was finally changing. Stepping down from the stage, Sloane moved gracefully, purpose filling every stride. As she walked through the audience, people reached out, shaking her hand warmly, quietly thanking her, eyes shining with respect. She responded to each gesture warmly, aware that her leadership was not merely symbolic, it was deeply personal, powerfully shared, transformative. Outside the auditorium, she paused briefly, taking a moment to breathe deeply, absorbing the profound shift she'd just set into motion. Beside her stood Raina, smiling proudly, her eyes bright with admiration. "You were incredible," Raina said warmly, squeezing her aunt's hand gently. "They didn't just hear you, they felt you." Sloane smiled quietly, looking warmly at her niece. "We did this together," she replied. "This is your victory too." Raina nodded, eyes glistening gently. "No more silence," she said firmly, echoing her aunt's earlier words. "No more silence," Sloane repeated softly, the words powerful and clear, not merely a slogan, but a promise now permanently etched into their collective purpose. As they walked away from the summit together, Sloane's mind briefly drifted back to the countless moments that had brought her to this pivotal day. The humiliations, confrontations, victories, and quiet breakthroughs. Each experience had shaped her, forced her visibility, compelled her voice, and ultimately changed an entire industry. But now, all that struggle felt profoundly worthwhile. In the days and weeks that followed, headlines documented the decisive impact of her speech. Congressional hearings were scheduled, task forces formed, industry coalitions strengthened, and meaningful reforms rapidly became policy. Passenger dignity mandates gained momentum federally, supported publicly by industry leaders who had quietly backed Sloane from the start. The change wasn't simply symbolic. It was real, measurable, and lasting. Returning quietly to her Jet Air Dominion office weeks later, Sloane gazed thoughtfully across the familiar city skyline, recognizing clearly that the silence she once navigated so carefully had transformed into powerful, unmistakable clarity. Her legacy was no longer quiet professionalism. It was public integrity, genuine accountability, and systemic justice. It was visible, lasting, and undeniably powerful. She knew clearly now, true leadership wasn't simply about surviving challenges, it was about transforming them into enduring change. She had navigated darkness to reach this clarity, emerging stronger and inspiring others to join her. Ensuring dignity became universal, fairness absolute, justice transparent. As evening settled gently over the city, she felt deep contentment and quiet certainty. There was no more invisibility, no more quiet complicity, only purposeful action, integrity made visible, and the clear understanding that genuine change demanded voices unafraid to speak. No more silence, only clarity, dignity, and power, now visible, respected, and permanently affirmed. Sloane Carter's voice had been heard, and now no one would ever silence it again. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.